for very much longer, as we will see as we start looking in detail with the worm's eye view of these next set of verses. So, verse 14, now in those times many shall rise up against the king of the south. Also violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of this vision, but they shall fail. So this is talking about Egypt, the king of the south. So we're going to dissect this verse a little bit and see what history has been able to tell us about this verse. Now you have to remember that when this information was given to Daniel so he could write it down, it was going to happen hundreds of years in the future. So telling the names or the countries or whatnot wouldn't have meant a lot to Daniel at this time because they really didn't exist. They really weren't pertinent. But they are important to us in the time of the end as we study, and it gives us confidence in God's words and God's prophecies as they have been fulfilled and completed. So, looking at this verse 14. So the king of the south was actually King Ptolemy IV of Egypt. And he died, and the rule was passed to his 5-year-old son, Ptolemy V. Okay, so Egypt, king of the south, and now there's a new king, this 5-year-old boy, Ptolemy V. Antiochus III was the king of the north. He was the king over the northern parts of remnants of the Greek Empire. And he saw a chance, he saw an opportunity to take over Egypt by marching in and defeating this 5-year-old king. And so he joined forces with Philip V of Macedonia. Macedonia is the northern part of Greece. Alexander the Great's father was Philip also, and that's where he came from. So that goes back to verse 14. But the kingdom of Rome was also growing now in stature and getting larger and spreading out. And the kingdom of Rome went through there was a couple of ways to conquer other cities and other countries. You could do it with military force, by brute force, and conquer them and fight battles. Or you could maybe do it peacefully, diplomatically. And Rome tried to do that as much as they could. And so what it says here, that they would go to a city and they say, look, we can either conquer you with our army, or you can peacefully just join us. And if you join us, become part of the Roman Empire, we are going to protect you with our army, but you'll just have to pay taxes to us. You'll have to send your sons off to join our army for military service and that type of thing, because Rome also had their eyes on Egypt. And they told Antiochus III to stay out of Egypt. So we'll go now to the next verse, 15. We'll read it, and then we'll kind of describe what history has taught us from this verse. Verse 15, Daniel 11. So the king of the north shall come and build a siege mound and take a fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist. So, the king of the north, let's see what history told us. Antiochus, I don't know if that's pronounced right, but that's kind of the way I'm going to do it tonight. Antiochus III ignored Rome. Rome said, just stay where you're at, stay away from Egypt. He starts moving towards Egypt, and he attacks Gaza. Gaza is a portion of Israel today. You hear talk about the Gaza Strip along the Mediterranean. It's kind of southwest. There's a city of Gaza. It was a strongly defended, fortified city southwest of Jerusalem. What it says here is that Antiochus attacked Gaza. Rome reacted to that. They declared war on Antiochus III, and they defeated him at the Battle of Pydna in 168 BC. And Greece was defeated by Rome, and now Rome became the new king of the north. And this is all in verse 15. So go on to verse 16. Verse 16 says, but he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power. Now, when you hear the word glorious land, that kind of sounds like Holy Land. It kind of sounds like we're talking about where God's people live, where Jerusalem is, the 12 tribes of Israel, etc. So let's see what we can find here from history. The Roman general Pompey and his army began moving. They conquered Asia Minor, which is what we know as Turkey today, and Syria, which is north of Israel. And eventually they conquered Jerusalem after about a 3-month siege battle. And for the next 200 years, Rome would rule over God's people in the Holy Land of Jerusalem and Judea. Verse 17, he shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do. And he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy it, but she shall not stand with him or before him. You read that and you think, it's kind of hard to understand exactly what they mean by this. I know it means something, and it's talking about kingdoms and moving and daughter. Let's see what history tells us about verse 17. Well, there's been a couple of kings since that 5-year-old king, and now we're up to the newest king, which is Ptolemy the 11th. He dies. He places his 2 children kind of in charge, but they're under a guardianship of Rome. He realizes that Rome is the rising power in the world, and he wants to be on the good side of Rome. So he says, all right, before he died, he said, my 2 children, Cleopatra and Ptolemy the 12th, they will report to you, Rome, and I hope everything works out for the best. Well, it didn't work out for the best. There was fighting between the 2 children. And so Rome decided to send in General Pompey to kind of settle things and kind of cool things off in Egypt. He was coming in as kind of a friendly force to kind of help out and restore order and the correct chain of command. Now, just as kind of a background in history, Roman General Pompey was the leader of the forces out in the field, conquering the Holy Land and whatnot. Julius Caesar was back in Rome. Julius Caesar was, as some have put it, kind of the mastermind of building up of the Roman Empire. And then there's the treasurer. You always have to have a treasurer, keep track of things, and that was a man by the name of Crassus, and he was back in Rome also. So General Pompey, who has just conquered Turkey, Syria, and the Holy Land, is now moving into Egypt. And so we'll see what happens. He is killed crossing the Nile River by the forces under Cleopatra, daughter of Ptolemy, the king who just died. Julius Caesar of Rome steps up to replace the role of General Pompey. Julius Caesar was a general in his own right. And so as he moves in to kind of settle things, he comes to find himself very attracted to the daughter of Egypt, Cleopatra. And so he tries to make her his mistress and tries to become romantically involved with her. But Cleopatra was not interested in Julius Caesar. She turned her romantic interest to Mark Antony of Rome, another general and leader of Rome. And Mark Antony happened to be Julius Caesar's enemy. So Cleopatra worked with Mark Antony against Julius Caesar. So anyway, let's go on to verse 18. After this, he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall take many. Okay. But a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end, and with the reproach removed, he shall turn back on him. Kind of hard to, you kind of get a picture in your mind of what that may mean, but it's hard to say exactly what that means. But history told us. History tells us that, what coastlands would be there. Pompey just conquered the coastlands from the north and from the east down to Egypt. So what coastlands would be there? for Julius Caesar to take over? Well, history tells us that Julius Caesar left Egypt and headed west across North Africa, conquering everything in his way, conquering all the cities and the areas and everything. And so Julius Caesar goes back to Rome, and you think they would be welcoming him as a conquering general and a hero, but he had enemies in Rome, and they thought Julius Caesar was becoming too powerful. And our system of government is based upon three supposedly equal branches: the executive branch, the president, vice president, etc., the legislative branch of Congress, House of Representatives, and the Senate, and then the judicial branch with the court system and ultimately the Supreme Court. They had a similar type of government in Rome, and so you had the Senate, and the Senate was getting kind of jealous. They saw the power increasing upon Julius Caesar, and so his enemies in the Senate hatched a plot to kill and to overthrow Julius Caesar. Verse 19, then he shall turn his face toward the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Well, let's see what history tells us what this verse means. Returning to Rome, Julius Caesar meets with the Roman Senate after his military victories in North Africa, but his friend Brutus and Caesar's other enemies, in a surprise attack, they hid knives under their robes. They attacked him on the floor of the Senate, and they stabbed him to death. Supposedly he was stabbed 23 times. Shakespeare wrote a play about this, and supposedly after Caesar was stabbed by, I'm not sure if he was stabbed by Brutus, or Brutus was about ready to stab him, and he says, "Et tu, Brute, and you, Brutus, you, my friend, you're going to stab me also." So this is a well-known historical fact. Became a play by the great author, playwright Shakespeare of England, and yet it was all predicted in these verses in Daniel chapter 11. Gives us a lot of confidence in God's word and prophetic view of history, doesn't it? Well, we'll look at a couple more verses here, but before that, we'll fill in the blanks on the historical side of it. Mark Antony, by rights, should have succeeded Caesar. And perhaps that's what Brutus and the senators of Rome were thinking, that Mark Antony would become the new leader, and perhaps they could work better with him. But Mark Antony had taken off. He had taken off with Cleopatra. Cleopatra had an affinity for him. He had an affinity for Cleopatra, and off they went. I'm not sure where all they went, but I know one place they went was Ephesus. Ephesus was a major city, Asia Minor, Turkey, and Kim and I went on a tour there a few years ago, and our tour guide told us, he said, the street that you are walking on right now, Mark Antony and Cleopatra walked down this same street. So that's one place that they went. But they ended up both committing suicide. And so there was no legitimate heir in his family. Julius Caesar did not have any sons to succeed him, and so his nephew became the heir, became appointed as the emperor of Rome, and that was Octavius or Augustus Caesar. Now, we've heard that name before, haven't we? We've heard that name in the Bible before. So we'll tie that in here. Verse 20, there shall arise in his place one who opposes taxes on the glorious kingdom. Is that the right word? Let me look that up. I might have typed that in wrong. Imposes. There you go. That sounds a little better. Imposes taxes, not opposes. There shall rise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom, but with a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. So what does this mean exactly? Well, Augustus Caesar imposes taxes on the people of his vast empire, all over the empire. And that's where we have heard the word Caesar Augustus in the Bible, in Luke chapter 2, verse 1, because taxes are mentioned. And it says there in that verse, and it came to pass in those days that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And so that is why Mary and Joseph had to leave Nazareth. You know, Mary was pregnant with the baby Jesus to be born, and they had to travel down to Bethlehem, the city of David, because that was where Joseph's family was from. They had to go down there and register and sign in and be part of a census and to pay the taxes. So taxes are mentioned here in this verse, verse 20 in chapter 11, and it's, several hundred years later, it's going to be an issue around where Jesus is born. So it's just kind of fascinating, isn't it? And of course, we know from the ministry of Jesus, the tax collectors were always being talked about, People were saying, how come you're hanging around with tax collectors, Jesus? And Jesus said, well, I came to save people that needed to be saved, You're eating with tax collectors and sinners, There's Zacchaeus up in the tree. He was a tax collector. And Jesus said, come down, Zacchaeus. I'm going over to your house. We're going to have some lunch together. So taxes, tax collectors, it's all here, hundreds of years before it happened. Very fascinating, I think. So like I said, Caesar Augustus imposed taxes, and that was the reason Mary and Joseph went to Bethlehem, where Jesus was born, and of course Isaiah said that that's where the Messiah would be born. That's where he would be born, was in Bethlehem. Julius Caesar ruled for 40 years, and he truly established the Roman Empire as we think of the Roman Empire. So go to another verse here. And in his place shall arise a vile person, to whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. So it sounds like we're going to have a story here about who succeeds Caesar Augustus, who died. And we do have a story. Augustus Caesar, just like his uncle Julius Caesar, did not have his own son to pass the emperorship down to. But his wife, Livia, had been married before she married Julius Caesar. She had a son named Tiberius, and she said, I think my son Tiberius should be the next emperor. And Augustus said, no, he's not going to be the emperor. He chose Agrippa. We've heard that name, Agrippa, also in the New Testament. But Agrippa died before Augustus Caesar could install him as emperor. So finally, Caesar Augustus agreed, okay, we'll let Tiberius, his wife's son, become the new emperor. And so that's what happened. But as the Bible predicted, where it says, and at his place shall arise a vile person, is Tiberius was an evil, vile man. And when he died, the residents of Rome rejected him. They refused to honor him in any way. He lived up to what the Bible said about him, and he was a vile man. And then it says, with the force of a flood, verse 22, this will be our last verse tonight. With the force of a flood they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. Well, it was during the reign of the Emperor Tiberius that Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem, just as the Bible predicted when it talks about the prince of the covenant. There's some other things we could talk about there, but that's kind of the key thing, I think, in that verse, the prince of the covenant. Jesus, the Messiah, would come during the reign of Tiberius, this vile emperor, and right on time, just as the Bible predicted, even with the taxes imposed when Jesus was born by the Emperor Caesar Augustus. It's all very fascinating, a lot of history, and it's all right here in Daniel chapter 11 if people will take the time to study it and to understand it and to study the history of the time. It's right there as God predicted it. Very interesting. So with that, we will close down and we'll start next time with verse 23. Continue our study of Rome, the king of the north, the rest of chapter 11. We've got a lot more verses to cover there. And we will transition to the rest of our AI activities tonight. And I can't wait to see what we're going to do right here with this, with these strings tied across here. So, thank you everybody.